I'll call the February 19th DRB meeting to order. First is agenda changes. Alright. If everybody can review the minutes of February 5th.
No comments.
Anybody else?
Move to accept the minutes. Looked good.
I'll abstain, I was not here.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Abstain?
We don't need a majority of the people here. We don't need a quorum. So,
Got it.
got it?
With 302 actually, but yes.
Alright, up next is Frost Properties LLC. Conditional use review for a change in a non-conforming retail use. Continued from January 15th. Hello.
So what's our quorum for this meeting? Or are people vouched in from not having been at the last one?
I was at the one.
So I was
For
at
this
the
one?
last one.
I was.
Okay, so we have
I would-
four. Okay, at
Okay.
least. Okay.
I would say though, in this particular case, since not a lot was actually accomplished at the last, I'm
Right.
sure
Well, our
before a
rules don't
decision.
require anybody to participate, to at
Right.
least review, so. I gather we're there, so.
No, it's good.
But
it's
if
a good
necessary,
point.
we could just go back and dig everything up from the beginning.
We wanna wait and see if Ted shows up, or?
I think we should go ahead.
Ted was at the first meeting, right? So he's aware of what was discussed at the first meeting.
Yeah, I believe so.
I think he's gonna be fine.
So we continued it because we wanted the owner to be here, and there was some discussion about the stormwater and access, and if you can explain some of that, that'd be.
What were the questions about stormwater? Because we,
From what I remember, there was a ditch.
There was a neighbor, Beth
Wait,
Coda, who was here at the last meeting, who's not here now, the neighboring property owner to the north, who was concerned about runoff. Not maybe necessarily coming off the Frost property, but coming from the west, and
But the ditch was filled in.
Yeah, that's part of it.
I mean, stormwater has been an ongoing issue on our property because we're influenced from the sawmill. And they have a sort of a containment pond, but I think they were like grandfathered in. So it's been an ongoing issue since we've owned the property, and I know before that it was an issue for Reggie, so.
Okay. Now,
And we're affected by the lack of stormwater control from the sawmill.
okay. Now, what about the ditch above your parking lot?
That's the outflow from the containment pond, if you will. It's not really, it's nowhere near our containment pond on our new site. And I guess according to Lynn, they have to like test the TDS of the water in that periodically. So the outflow from that pond goes across the road. There's a lot of sediment in it, and so it continually fills the ditch on the uphill side of our property that then sort of backs up to Holly's, property.
Okay.
So that's the issue, and we try to keep it, cleaned out, but it's an ongoing task. The state used to do it when Reggie owned it, probably because Reggie yelled at him and told him to, but we're not that forceful. Because there's also, it's also affected by there's a ditch along 116 that also crosses the road there. So I don't know if because of that he got the state involved, but it's certainly, as long as the ditch is cleaned out.
You're talking along this side of the road?
On the north side of our property line.
Right.
So
you have
there
this-
is,
you have
right,
this ditch.
right. So to the north of 116 on the east side, there's a ditch that runs along there.
So over here coming to here.
Right, and then it crosses. Right.
So that area that fills up is technically not your property, it's north
Right.
of yours then?
Right.
Okay.
And as long as the ditch is cleaned out, it's sort of a non-issue, but if you were to ask me about stormwater, I would say it's not our stormwater issue, it's the neighbor's stormwater issue.
Okay.
And then is it at a elevation, does it flood your parking area?
A little bit, yeah. If the ditch isn't cleaned out, it does tend to back up a little bit.
The neighbor's home, which is over here, is on a higher elevation, and this area over here is sort of a low area.
It's kind of a swamp, it's really what it is. But you know, the soils around there are basically gravel, so in terms of stormwater, the water normally just runs right into the ground, but something about that, as I said, when it's definitely influenced from the sawmill, and it brings sediment in, it fills the ditch up, we clean it out, and then it goes away.
Yeah, I think that was her point, that her property is most inundated when the ditch fills up.
Right.
And so she was just worried about, is there any way that, it can be managed, I think.
Yeah, and I do think it's a state issue also, because it's definitely influenced by the state ditch, so. We've dealt with the DOT or whoever it is, VTrans, and we've not asked them to deal with that, but they're pretty responsive to things like that, I would think. We just did it ourselves, so.
Well, to be honest, this is helpful to know that it's not your property where that stormwater issue is. A general sentiment is that the reduction in use on this site lends itself to an opportunity to reduce your impervious surface, which
Right.
then adds to that overall magnitude of flow. So whether that's a possibility or not, the overall flooding and or the issues that are there existing, it's obvious that you're not contributing a significant degree of that issue. So I have to figure out. I don't think there's much that we can do, frankly, from this kind of site. But it would be valuable to hear from you whether you think there's room, because clearly your use is reduced in terms of the overall demand on that site going down.
Right.
So whether you can do something to trap your own stormwater or treat it at least on your own property before it goes into that ditch or swale that's currently not working.
The problem is that there's a limited amount of space there to do any treatment or anything.
Yeah, the swale may not be on their property, but they do have water flow coming off their property that is going into that ditch.
So that's what I was just wondering, whether there's something that we could do to reduce the impervious
Is it
surface.
going into the ditch
Well,
from your
a
parking lot, or is it
majority-
uphill from there?
Yeah, I mean, basically the outflow from our parking lot goes straight west.
Mhm.
So really, what's causing,
Well, now-
that's what I'm saying, that what's causing the CODIS problem isn't stormwater from our property, it's from, just imagine the surface area of the sawmill. It's a dirt,
So the
parking
picture that was
area.
just up, then that drain, there's a arrow in the parking lot that says drainage, and it kind of shows it draining across the parking lot toward the
Yeah,
ditch.
it
Not that
drain-
one, the one that you had up previously, that guy. Yeah, so right in the middle there, tiny little print.
It shows it's going north sloping.
This way, there. Little arrow shows it sloping across, and
There's actually a berm right there, so that's not exactly accurate, because for the water to go out, it has to go more west.
Yeah, It
That's
appeared
like
from
northwest.
that photo that was shown, it looks almost as if where the gravel parking and the pavement parking, that looks to be a low point.
Exactly, that's exactly right.
But
okay. So it seems like, one thing that would be prudent would be to have a new site plan that correctly describes, where the water flow and stuff is going, but, because if that's the current site plan, then that's incorrect, according to what we just heard.
But if the CODIS are concerned about stormwater, what I would say is that we're not the people contributing to their problem.
And tonight was the first night that I heard that it's also highway water that's flowing through that, not just from the sawmill. Okay.
Most of the sediment though, that fills the ditch comes from the sawmill.
So just to pick up the point, asking for your feedback, is that gravel parking area and the notes that staff has provided, as well as just the application, how there might be only 1 or 2 employees on site, and then I don't know how many customers at any one point, but the supply of parking there is definitely in excess of what you need with the proposal. So I guess I'm of the opinion that we should treat this as a site plan of something that we're generating, that we're seeing kind of fresh, and the amount of impervious surface there would lend itself to some sort of treatment on site. And so the gravel parking seems to me a pretty logical place to put some grass, or we've heard that grass can't treat stormwater, I guess, but it seems like that in making that pervious and providing your opportunity to treat your own stormwater, that would be a suggestion that I would try to support to the other board members here.
The problem with that is that if you were to look at the grade there, where the gravel area is higher.
Yeah, it kind of look like that in
goes-
the aerial.
Right, just as you said, at the end of the pavement is the low point, and from there it goes up, over years, the blazes filled that quite a bit, so it goes up at that point, but.
Is that this area that I'm using the hand on?
Right,
That
exactly.
area?
Yeah. And the other concern I have is, limiting our potential uses going forward.
Sorry, I'm always one click behind in that picture that you just had up,
Oh,
where you were kind of pointing in the back. Is that a storm drain in the middle of the parking lot here?
No, that's a hole in the pavement.
Sort of a storm drain.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to be the low point in the parking lot, and,
That's
It's a
Vermont
small,
version
it's a
of-
small infiltration basin.
Right.
Yeah.
okay.
So continue on. I'm curious to hear about, because I had some concerns about the access to the site and also the oil tanks that are buried. So it lends itself to understand where you're going with the use of the site.
Well, we don't want to limit ourselves, we'd like to leave all options. We're obviously, we are interested in selling it, and we're actively trying to sell it. We want to keep the use in the meantime, but.
Rob, I'm sympathetic to that, but our zoning regulations are fairly specific, and I think this should be rezoned to allow for this kind of use that may not be allowed now. But we have to deal with the regulations as they appear, and part of how you may be able to develop the property going forward lies in getting it rezoned, rather than asking us to do things that are almost, well, I'm not saying putting square pegs in round holes, but it's a challenge for us as a board. I think this intersection is kind of a quaint commercial area potential, and this should be zoned for something like this. And that's the easiest solution going forward in the near term.
Not most expedient.
Not most expedient, and we're trying to give Rob time to make use of the property, and at the same time deal with our regulations as they exist.
What's interesting to me is that this, as my understanding is that this was a store before there was zoning in Hinesburg.
Yep.
So how it,
Well, it's a non-conforming use, and we have regulations that limit how far we can treat with or expand non-conforming uses.
no, I understand that, but my question is, or what I don't understand is if it was a store before there was zoning in Hinesburg, why wasn't it automatically a commercial zone? So when they went through and
Automatically
started.
commercial zone, it was grandfathered in, but that doesn't mean it has commercial value going forward without any kind of regulation.
No, but I just always wondered why, maybe I'm wrong, but it's been a store since, do you know how long? When did
I
zoning
think
become?
I hear it.
72.
When the new zoning,
So
they
this has
look at
been
the
a store
current
since
uses.
before 72, so why when they brought up zoning in the town and there's a store there.
You know, why they put Iroquois in an industrial zone right up there in residential village, I don't know, and
That's
they
right.
didn't make commercial here. I don't know, we
Yeah.
weren't there.
More
No, I
like,
know, but-
more
but-
likely no one asked to have it done. It didn't get brought up, not that they wouldn't have.
But
necessarily.
my point is, we're, again, that we're not asking for a change of use. I mean, this is, I guess we're asking for a change.
We're kind of
Yeah.
stretching the regulations, and
Yeah.
I for one, and I think every board member here, is trying to do what we can to work within our regulations
Right.
to accommodate you. And going forward, a great solution is to get this rezoned, and that's something that could be done maybe within a year, but we have to deal with a near-term issue of you, and we're trying to deal with your extension requests and so forth as best we can within the four corners of our regulation.
Right.
I mean, so part of what we're trying to do is to keep the options open, right? To keep things going. And one thing that concerns me is the fuel sales, gasoline sales, and whether or not it's your intention to also keep that door open, or are you ready to say that? Because the reason I'm concerned is that there are kind of stringent requirements for a gas station, and I'm sure this is not zoned for a gas station any more than it's zoned for a store. And also the access to it, where the pumps are at, how it interfaces with 116, just looks like something that would not possibly pass today. And so I guess my concern is if we do, come up with a decision that allows it to go forward as a retail, are we also including the option? I don't want to grandfather in a gas station. I think a gas station would require a significant approval or review. And so I'm just worried that in the process of kind of continuing this and grandfathering it, that a gas station is also getting continued.
Yeah, and it's not, I wouldn't call it a gas station, it's a convenience store that has gas as a convenience versus a gas station. But I would say to you that the people that we've talked to that are most interested in keeping this retail, that's the least of their concerns is the gas. But with that being said, the community around us, the one thing that they really miss the most is the gas. It's very convenient for people locally to get gas, so. And in terms of this, from the state standpoint, we have a clean SMAC report. It's it has double wall tanks, it's up to date on all of that stuff. There's no contamination or anything like that, so.
Now, just in terms of formalities, is that because of a non-conforming use, if you were to sell the building, they have to come back for a permit as well. Right, so we're discussing the potential retail use that you are applying for here, which is very limited in kind of activity.
So that can be, so the issues that I'm asking about can be dealt with in the future by a future owner, is that?
Well, the challenge on that is if it's some type of use that is not being continued from one application to the other, it may be a challenge for this board to then continue that to the next.
It's not really continued.
Well, we're approving Rob's application. How that transforms into a prospective owner is a completely different issue.
Mhm.
That's more a legal issue, not only with deeds and so forth, but with our regulations going forward. Rob's asking for approval for what's going on there now, and we can't render an advisory opinion on how some prospective purchaser may be impacted by that.
But my only reason for asking that is because it's gonna limit the value of the property.
And I understand, and that's why I'm really suggesting
Go to the zone.
talk about getting this rezoned, because we at best can give you a limited opportunity to use this going forward in some kind of sense that conforms to what was going on, and I'm struggling with that, but I'm happy to try and work with you as best we can. But I can't really think about just carte blanche for any other commercial investment there. That's more a matter of zoning, I think, than dealing with this current application.
Well, certainly when it went from, this was continuous use, I'll agree, but when it went from Blazes to Frost, it just continued on as it was. But that,
Very much so, yeah. But then it was close to abandon, and we're trying to deal with that. And I'm
So
trying to be as
how did
flexible as
that
I can.
actually work? Because I thought conditional use doesn't
It's
go
a-
with the
no,
property
it is a
sale.
grandfathered use at this location. No matter who owns it, it's a grandfathered use.
And
But
and
it's
it's
a
only grandfathered
non-conforming-
As long as it's being used.
It's a non-conforming use.
Exactly, pre-existing, non-conforming. That
So
is
it's a
the-
question of whether it's a significant change from what
Right.
was there.
Right.
It's not just a change from one conditional use to another. This is a non-complying use from the get-go. And I have trouble with that concept. This should be rezoned because this is a sensible use of this property. But it's not under our existing regulations.
So, some of the issues that concern me with just kind of where this is going is that the gas pumps are in a place that wouldn't be permitted today if a new owner or you were to use gas pumps. What I would like to see is that, because you could continue this use for the next 20 years, and I would want to know whether we have an environmental risk, is that if there's a letter or some sort of support to document the condition of the tanks that are basically decommissioned and that they're going to be sitting there as it's on your private property, I can see where the tanks are. But in essence, by supporting your use, we're saying, yes, it's fine to keep those tanks in
My
the
guess
ground.
is the state, if there's a decommissioned gas station, regulates what happens to the tanks. I don't know that, but that's my good guess.
I mean, in essence, we're approving the okay for those tanks to be in the ground for this use.
I'm not sure we have any regulation over that.
Okay.
Yeah, not sure we have either.
Well, I'm just trying to sound this out, that by accepting the retail use and keeping the tanks in there, are we then saying we're fine with whatever is underground?
We can ask staff to investigate that. I mean, they're buried there, they're gonna be there.
I don't want to be approving a potential environmental risk in the future. Let's say they're in horrible shape,
Well,
just,
Ann is the
Tanks
one
are
that can
empty.
speak to that.
yeah.
So when we closed, our Champlain Oil came and drained the tanks.
Mhm.
And also removed the pumps. So
Mhm.
in terms of, and every year the state inspected the tanks to,
Right.
you know.
And that won't happen anymore, but in terms of the soil around the tanks or whatever, we don't know,
And it was, in this,
right?
we had a discussion with the state because it was considered a potential hazardous site.
Mm-hmm.
I
Any gas
would
station.
probably get this wrong, and so we said, we're not using the tanks now, but we may in the future, and she said, well, when you do, then you contact us and
Mm-hmm.
we deal with it at that point. So, but understand that the tanks in the ground are one part of the equation and the pumps are another.
That's
So
right.
when you
Mhm.
said that the pumps aren't in a location that's feasible, the pumps can be moved and the tanks can stay where they are.
Right.
Because we actually looked at doing that at one point.
Yeah, and so I appreciate that. And so the what I guess we could just discuss as staff is that in essence, by not approving a gas station there, but leaving pumps in the ground, are we approving by leaving tanks in the ground, are we in essence approving tanks to be in the ground?
I think we can do some kind of condition that
Mhm.
requires investigation to determine whether there's any kind of environmental hazard there.
Yeah, and then so regarding the pumps, they're clearly not in use, and we have a responsibility to look at access to the site, and simply it would be my suggestion that I'd be comfortable approving this type of application if we were to define the access to your driveway a little bit more clearly, and that could be just simply putting up some grass or putting in some temporary curbs that would make it more visible as to where people would enter and park on your site.
And is it more clear as to what the state requires on this? Because that seemed to be kind of a question mark.
I spoke to some people in the state, and Basically, they acknowledged that the access was obviously not to what they would approve now, but they wouldn't require a change, but they would if the town required them to, required a change on the site, that state approval would be required, or the state would basically look into it.
It's one of, you know, I've tried to limit access to the site, but there is a 75-foot right-of-way there.
So where does that go relative to
I mean,
the,
it's-
to the pumps?
It's over the pumps and partway into the building.
So they're in the state right away right now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think this is the right-of-way
Okay.
line right here.
Yeah, so they're in the,
So
You can
does
see
it
that little-
expand? Because I asked, you know, there were trees near the Coda's property, and so I contacted them to see if we could cut the trees back, and he said it was a 75-foot right
Well,
of
that's
way.
35 feet.
35 right there, okay.
So you said it was 70?
well,
See, it
75, maybe
opens
right
up
off, the
to
whole
the
width
north.
maybe.
The whole width is, right.
is
No,
70.
no, actually not, because as I asked them that, and it was 75 feet from the center line,
Onto your
on the
property.
north side of the property.
Wow.
But it looks like it comes, so does the right-of-way go around the pumps, is that what I'm seeing?
That's what it says on this
That's a
plan.
very
but-
interesting.
Well, I don't
But this
know.
is a 1999 plan, so
Yeah.
it's
But is it still in
19 years
effect?
old.
I mean, does that get changed, or
No.
does
That's interesting. It would be my interest to try to be clear that from a local land use, we don't want people just pulling in next to these old artificial pumps, and it would be nice to know where your driveway is, and that would be my suggestion.
Right, and I agree with that, and we would like to do that as well, because people pull over, it's the end of cell service, so there's a lot of cars that park there, and we'd love to limit the access.
Gotcha.
But as I said, because it wasn't
Your-
our property,
Sure, V-Trans would be more than happy to work with you to narrow that down.
Yeah.
It's typically of that mindset.
So in the interest of keeping it as a ongoing retail, I know you've given hours and it's like every day of the week, 9 to 2, was it? I forget. So I guess my question is, so if businesses, will it always be staffed between those hours every day? Or if you don't get a lot of retail business, will you just not staff it and you'll only have somebody there if somebody wants to come in? And in which case, that doesn't seem to me to really meet a daily retail use.
so we were hoping it would pick up momentum and increase, you know, volume and traffic. So it could be staffed full-time.
Okay.
Currently, it's not, we're right across the
Shared
street,
staff.
so try to cover both properties with the same personnel.
Okay.
Board members have any other questions?
Don't believe so.
the question
I
is.
think-
Well, I would make a motion that we close the public hearing and direct staff to work hard to devise conditions of approval.
I guess my questions is, as far as, you talked about the entrance. Are you requiring actually a change to an entrance? Do you want to?
I think we have to direct them to work with the state to make improvements in the state right-of-way to limit the entrance. Because the way this is situated, I think they can't do anything along the roadside of that right-of-way without consultation and agreement. So how can you require them to make a 35-foot entrance when they have no control over it?
I thought I heard,
So you can require them to work with the state to develop a plan for a 35-foot entrance, but I don't think you can just blanket, just go tell them to go do it.
I
because
thought I
they-
heard Rob
if-
saying
they
basically
can't-
the state wants to hear from us first.
Well, so our requirement will be to work with the state to develop a 35
Or,
foot.
or we could come up with a proposal that they might just rubber stamp.
That would be surprising without a lot of detail, because he has to work within the state right of way to.
That requires a V-Trans permit, but we could, it's simple language that the Route 16 corridor study that was done in the town has the standard language for V-Trans approved driveways, and it's a 40-foot commercial driveway width.
We could make recommendations.
So we can make a
consistent with it.
recommendation,
Yeah,
be
I guess-
consistent with V-Trans access
Yeah,
guidance.
Yep, I agree, that's the
And,
way we should do it, but we can't just say, go do it, because he has to get that permit and
Yeah.
agreement, but that could happen.
With the understanding that safety is a concern there, because it's definitely, you know, we've seen accidents
Oh, yeah.
there, so I'm not sure that a narrow access is going to be the safest way to go.
It's a tough with the hill there.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the start of a high crash location that the state knows about. There's not a lot, but you're reducing traffic demands relative to what was there in the past, and that's going to be an issue that, again, your future, if anybody purchases it from you, they're going to have to be sensitive to that, because they're going to be holden to more stringent issues on traffic and safety.
All right, I'm just getting a sense here, because just to get this, I'm seeing here travelway, which is probably about 24 feet, if it's a standard, 18-foot long parking, so we're talking about from here to here, probably about 60 feet.
That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we're talking about here, if we make this a 40-foot entrance, you're looking at something, say, from there to here, or some type of thing there with an entrance that probably flares out in some, in that particular way. All right, I'll write up a draft decision on this to basically work with the state to narrow the entrance to as close to 40 feet as, or just
You
to
could
narrow,
say-
just basically say to narrow the entrance to provide a more controlled access egress. Are we putting a time limit on this, or anything like that, or you want to
You can
just?
tell them to return to the DRB with the details within X months. Well, I guess they have to update the site plan. So what we're gonna do is require an updated site plan within X
6
months,
months.
whatever we want, X
Require-
day, right?
Updated site plan in, say, 6 months.
Okay.
And the V-Trans language just be, it's V-Trans commercial driveway.
Yep.
They have a standard detail.
Standard V-Trans commercial
And-
driveway.
It's 40 feet at its narrowest point. It has
Right.
big throats depending on the types of vehicles that would be accessing it.
All right, so we've talked
What
drainage.
are those two parking spots right by the public telephone? Is that a public telephone?
That's,
Are those, were they envisaged handicap or something?
no, those were planters that the Blazes put there.
That's kind of a choke point.
Well, and they're gone. Those planters are gone. They planted those so that people wouldn't drive into the store and run away with their cash. I think. But I can have this.
Oh, so that's going to be part of the updated site plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really figure out what's going on, because
Can I give you an opinion too, that if we actually limit, limit the access, say, north of the island, the pumps, that's gonna cut that open area in half. So that's what I would petition for.
well, you're going to come back with us a revised site plan,
Okay.
so
My question is, when I'm talking and meeting with V-Trans, I was told that you're gonna ask me to give them direction on what we want. Is that what I heard? So I guess I don't know what that direction is then.
I think you're hearing us say, open it up as much as you can.
Okay.
Open it up, reduce it.
Reduce it.
Well,
Reduce the frontage to 116 along the
Oh,
building, but you wanna,
reduce some artificial barriers.
And the only reason I'm concerned about the opening is because, you know, people duck in there to get off the road when they're trying to turn. So I'm asking that we consider making that wider than 40 feet, that's all, just for safety reasons.
Along the actual frontage, it will probably be wider.
Right.
Where there'll be a curve, and then at the point where the curves are narrowest, that will be 40 feet. That's the typical dimension.
As long as those people can get off the travel portion of the road.
Yeah.
for
V-Trans will
safety.
work with you to try to find something, I'm sure, is that they're from 253 feet or whatever it was that was on another application, I'm sure. They'll be happy to work with you to reduce the potential for people just to pull over in front of the pumps today. That's the main objective, is that in front of the pumps and in front of the building in that most eastern southerly area, that will be restricted.
So it seems like I'm meeting with V-Trans to get their input on what to do and then come back to you, is that,
It's probably the sequence.
okay.
Yeah, and you have the contact for the
And
We've
district.
dealt with
your
it.
current application is not contingent on working all this stuff out.
Right.
That's something going forward, so start thinking about it now, though.
Right. Well, we have to deal with them on the driveway across the street, so I have opportunity to get that figured out.
Okay. And and what are the specifics on any specifics as far, well, the gas pumps are gone. Actually, do I need to say anything?
Can the gas pumps come out?
The gas pumps are.
I mean,
I mean,
the foundation, I mean,
There's a-
there is something still there vertical
Like an
where,
island.
yeah, there's an island still there.
Yeah. And the only thing connecting the tanks is piping,
Mhm.
so I would just have to figure out, because we don't want to create a way for contaminants to go into the
Hazards,
tanks,
yeah.
so I'd have to talk to Champlain Oil about how we could do away with that island and not compromise the tanks.
Right. I've stated that, to me, that's less of the issue than trying to block access and the parking to it. It's a visual issue that's no longer relevant. In my mind, that's just,
Right.
the way it is.
So dealing with the access and maybe the,
The island is secondary in my
Yeah,
opinion, but
right, because I do think that that's in a way protecting the integrity of the tanks. As it's.
Just wanna make sure that people can't run over or into, I think that's.
Well, the idea is would be
There are
that
boiler-
that would be
Yeah,
converted to
it's
grass
protected.
area, right?
There's
There are bowler
potentially, I mean, that would be
So,
optimal.
everywhere
It's also
there's
protecting the front of
blacktop
the
now
building.
would be, I presume, would be take out the blacktop and you grass it in.
Right.
And that would include potentially where the pumps are, and I don't know, the pipes underground, you cap them or something, whatever the process is. But people shouldn't be driving through your grass, so shouldn't be
I-
driving across the pipes.
Right, I agree. Well, that's what I was saying, that the pipes are like encased in that concrete. So what I would want to do is limit the access, turn it to grass, and then deal with the island after the fact, once we decide what.
I think that's where, as Greg said, we want to work with you and minimize your initial costs to do something, and that seems reasonable in my mind.
Okay.
So, where does the water actually flow off of this? So we've talked about it flows basically up the parking lot, but then you said where the gravel is, it's actually higher, so it's not
Yeah,
flowing
so-
on, it must veer off to the south?
No, actually, if you follow the dotted line across, the pavement basically is where the parking areas are.
Do you want to use this? This helps.
So this is the end of the pavement,
I'm gonna
and the
move the
water
plans down a
sheds
little bit down
out
here.
to this drainage ditch right through here.
Okay,
Because there's actually like a berm along here to protect the water from overflowing into the parking area.
So when you do your new site plan, you can just show where it's going.
Change the arrow?
Change the area.
Okay.
Are you going to work with a civil firm to update a site plan?
Am I?
Well, who did,
That was a question.
who did, who did?
That was a question. Are you going?
Well, that was a question back.
I don't think it's a requirement, right? I don't know at what level
pretty
of
minimal
complexity
updates, I guess,
do
but,
we restart requiring, because we've had some pretty big sites that weren't engineered drawings.
So whoever did the plan originally, as long as they're still in business, I could just go back to them and have them
Who
change
did
it.
it now, the right hand corner there?
Yeah.
I thought it was, is it LaRose?
It looks like, maybe,
Oh, it's Theodore Blumhardt.
yeah.
Can we get,
1999, is that what that says?
some reason I thought it was.
February 17th, 1999.
1999. Just yesterday.
I'll take a look at the original on this
And
to see
I
if I
can-
can find the people and all.
Yeah, so I think it's LaRose, and if it is, then that's easy to, I'm sure they have a copy of it, and I just call them
Yeah.
up and
Yep.
minor changes, minimal cost. I'm happy to do that. Last time we got engineers involved, it cost me about 20 grand, so we'd like to avoid that if possible.
So do you think you have enough, Mitch?
Yes.
You made a motion?
I did.
I'll second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks, folks.
All right,
You
move
don't
on
toss
to,
that application in the dustbin, Ann.
I will give it a lot of thought.
we'll move on to other business.
We have a decision, a draft decision for Robert Shea.
Looked great to me.
Looked good to me, too.
Mm-hmm.
I move to approve.
Do we have four?
Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain?
Okay. Other business, we have a request from Hinesburg Center 2 for an extension. Brett basically told me that he wants a 60-day extension. He'd like to keep at least one of, to keep it current, although he is planning in the next month to come in with a new sketch plan because he's changing it a bit. And so he'd like to be able not, so there is at least an overlap where he has an approved sketch plan. So he's asking for 60 days. I'd like to say it'd probably be better to make it 90 days, just to be sure. But he's asking for an extension. He's pretty much he's been delayed as well with the water situation, and that seems to be resolving itself. So he wants to come
We're
in.
on holiday in April, so I moved to give him a 90-day.
So have you discussed the I mean, is it significantly different? I mean, in other words, would it be better to just start it over?
That's what he's planning on doing a new sketch plan, but he'd like to keep the current sketch plan current until he's able to replace it with a new sketch plan. This way he can also keep, he won't have any problems with his allocations and so forth.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstain.
Can I say, I mean, I don't see why I can't approve that.
No,
Well, sure, I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's nothing
You
for
mean whether you
continue.
want to participate or not?
No, I mean, in the extension.
Oh, wait a second, that's right, you're,
Well, related to a landowner.
But as far, I mean,
You probably ought to recuse yourself,
Okay.
but it's going to pass anyway.
okay, I've recused.
I'll be recusing myself from that application.
1, 2, 3, 4.
okay. I'll just mention that we've got next, the meeting on the 5th, we're going to do some stormwater training. I know you said you can't be here.
No, unfortunately.
Well, it'll be on VCAM, and we might do a repeat performance sometime in the future.
What's that going to consist of? I could probably profit from that, but
Well,
I'm
here
not an
is
engineer, so.
here's one little bit of preview, and something that kind of bugged me a little bit. When we were doing the Hannaford hearing, after the second meeting, I was putting stuff up on the Dropbox, and I realized I forgot to put on the Dropbox the stormwater information. Now, granted, RGH had their stormwater engineer. I don't think anybody was stopped by that, but nobody asked about it. And I think a lot of times when people see a HydroCAD or some type of modeling program, I think they're kind of, it's something a little difficult for a lot of different people. So what I'd like to do is try to do a stormwater modeling basics. So when you actually look at this thing, you kind of have a sense of what it is. And we're going to potentially couple this with a person from the Regional Planning Commission who will come in and do a generalized stormwater.
That sounds like it would be useful for me, who doesn't know much about this stuff and
But that's
probably
kind- that's
skeptical about all these models anyway, but,
That's a
no,
smart place to
that
start.
sounds good. Yeah.
You know something?
Whether my
I'll-
skepticism is justified or not.
I'll tell you with
Always.
any type of modeling, that's a subject in of itself. That could be a whole. That's kind of where I'm trying
Probably
to do a
wouldn't get any
101,
answers, but
a
it should,
201, 301,
that
in
sounds
which
like
the
it's
way
gonna be useful
modeling
for
can
me,
be
so I need to be there for that.
manipulated. But yes, that's basically
Well,
what
it's
we.
important to kind of understand where the models, vary, or I mean,
Why-
it's not that the model's bad, but you got to know that there's certain
Limitations.
scenarios, that it may not be giving you the answer that you're looking for. So
And why two different people look at them differently? The applicant and the people fighting the applicant. You know what I mean?
That's kind of.
I can easily think of two reasons why.
It's like two lawyers. It's like two lawyers.
Well, this is going to be a 101 basics
Oh, that's what I
where
need. Okay.
it's
So
whichever way you decide to do modeling. We've got 2 confirmed applications for the March 19th meeting, subdivision revision, and actually Norris will come back for his preliminary final subdivision. And I think there's also a good possibility Brett may be able to make it to that particular meeting as well. So a bit on the horizon.
All right. Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn, second.
to your point of how two people can read, I mean, we had the environmental court decision. 2 different lawyers look at it and give you completely different answers.
That's not a first, Dick.
Well, I know. I mean, to me, I look at that and it's like, well, just how wishy-washy was that decision written? That you could read completely different things into it.